Please tell me your full name and where and when you were born.
Thomas L. Crowl, Jr. I was born in Cleveland, Ohio in 1943, and I currently reside on Philpott Road in London, Kentucky.
Do you have any family members that are serving or have served in the military?
Most of my family served at one time or another. My dad was a PFC in the Army and was discharged for health reasons. My uncle, Bob in Olmsted Falls, Ohio, who passed away recently, was probably the most noteworthy. He got a bunch of combat medals. He landed an Anzio in Italy and sustained some wounds. And he, because he was wounded, he sort of got out early, and he joined my aunt, who had the first PhD in physics from Chase Western in Cleveland, Ohio, and that was quite a team. He had at the time, he had a PhD in nuclear physics, of all things. So they grabbed him up and grabbed her up and took him down to down here, Oak Ridge, to work on the Manhattan Project. So I used to, in my spare time, which wasn't much, I would go to his library. He had all the original books on the devastation done in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And my aunt had a nervous breakdown after the war. When she started seeing some of the things that had happened, she was really upset, and I don't blame her. But I bought my grandmother, who lived with her, a radio that had tritium dials on it that lit at night, and she threw it out on the back lawn and smashed it to smithereens. She didn't want anything to do with nuclear anymore, and so that was quite traumatic for her. She lived to be about 97 and developed Alzheimer's and so forth. He died much sooner in 60. He was 67 when he died. As far as other service members, my dad served, and he ended up being a guard for POW detachment in southern Oregon, of all places, and got to become good friends with a ranch owner out there. And I'll get to that later. And then as far as other service members in the family, my other uncle, Mr. Pugh, he was a staff sergeant in the regular Army, and he served in Southeast Asia at the time, contracted malaria, which affected him for the rest of his life, and had a lot of other ailments he brought back from the military. And he was very close-mouthed about his service down there, so it hit him pretty hard, and didn't talk much about it. But he and my aunt were my math teachers. They were exquisite. They could handle a slide rule faster than anybody. And in fact, Bob told me one time, he said he had a slide rule, and he was talking to Robert Oppenheimer at Los Alamos, and he beat Robert with the slide rule. So that in itself is a noteworthy distinction. Anyway, he got out of the military after that and never looked back. Back then, the VA was just sort of coming and going in terms of helping ex-GIs, and he suffered enormously after that. And yet, me being the goofy that I am, when I graduated from high school, I spent about a year in college at Ohio University, and I really wasn't attuned to handling the college work. I was just a goof off from the get-go, and didn't do real well. And at the end of the first year in college, I decided to go into the military. So I enlisted in the Army in 1962, June 1st, 1962. My first assignment was I went to a testing facility in Cleveland, Ohio, because I had applied to be a counterintelligence officer, and that went by the wayside later on. But initially, they tested me and so forth, and I knocked the charts off for some reason. I must have had a good day. But anyway, I took my basic training at Fort Knox, Kentucky, and that was a wild wing for me. I was about halfway through my basic training, and the CO saw I had done some high school football and was 6'5", and he thought, wow, perfect end. So he assigns me this job as an end on his squad, and we after regular hours, we'd go out and play football against other teams. And as luck would have it, about the second catch I made, this 300-pound major landed on my shoulder and broke it in about 3 different places back there. And so my whole goal shifted at that point. They put me in a Valpo cast, which is a rascal that goes, it leaves your hand out, but that's about it. Everything else is plaster up to your neck. And the CO told me, he says, well, if you want to continue on your MOS, he said, you're going to have to pass the basic training course here. And I said, okay, no problem. He says, well, you realize, he says, you got to take a mile run, and you got to do it under 5 minutes. You got to disassemble and assemble an M1 rifle in less than 5 minutes. And you've got to do the obstacle course, which is dodging in or out of these things. And I did all that in a Valpo cast. And so I graduated from basic training. And upon graduating, I got the bad news that I would have to enlist for another 2 years so that I could get over my physical infirmities. And I told them, well, I'm not real keen on that. So they shipped me to Fort Jackson, South Carolina. And I went to advanced infantry training back in my infantry role, and didn't go into counterintelligence, didn't become an officer at that point. And so at Fort Jackson, besides having the first snow they'd ever had in 20 years, I had several experiences that were interesting. The CO saw I was somewhat linguistic. I could talk more than 2 words together, and I had a loud voice at the time. So he called me up one day and he says, well, you've just finished your advanced infantry training. He says, I've got 30 guys out here in another barracks that need close order drill. And I said, okay. And I said, why do they need that? He says, well, they're all Cubans, and we're shipping them over to the Bay of Pigs in a few weeks. And I looked at him like, you gotta be crazy. I'd never done close order drill with anybody before. So they slapped some temporary sergeant stripes on my arm, and the Cubans were wonderful people. Oh, geez, with just salt of the earth kind of folks. And it broke my heart later when they were all busted in Cuba. Most of them serving 10 years a sentence down there before they were released. And but boy, I learned something about strategy at that point in terms of the military. They really, when they committed to letting those folks train in the U.S., should have followed them up with support services. And the whole scenario down there in Cuba would have changed drastically over the years, but they didn't. And so anyway, at the end of that tour, I was reassigned to Fort Rucker, Alabama, of all crazy places. Fort Rucker is the training center for helicopter pilots and pilot insertion. I didn't think I wanted to be a pilot at the time. I have somewhat vertigo if I go too fast in one direction, so I didn't want to do that. But anyway, we were the support services for the helicopter airborne groups that eventually went to Vietnam. And one day I was sitting at a cafeteria table, and the CO walked in. And it was unusual to see him anywhere because he took lots of time off. He loved going down to Panama City Beach, and we were close by. And so he walked up to us, and me and another guy, he says, "You two are the ones I want to see." He says, I'm overstaffed, and he says, "I'm shipping two of you out. And one of you is going to go to the DMZ in Korea. The other is going to go into Schofield Barracks in Hawaii." And I said, "Wow." We flipped a coin, and it's the only coin toss in my whole life I've ever won. I went to Schofield Barracks in Hawaii. Rapidly was promoted to a Spec 4 rank, and I just it was all, everything we did there was in preparation for shipping the whole division over to Vietnam, and it was an interesting tour, to say the least. In the beginning, we did a bunch of assaults on beaches and so forth, and with my shoulder still not 100%, that was a trick, getting up and down the rope ladders, and on Molokai of all places. Molokai was a former leper colony founded by the Seventh-day Adventists, and we had. So anyway, I was there near Hawaii, and the CO says, "I need 3 or 4 guys to guard the Apollo astronauts who are going to be training up on Kilauea." And they trained at the time on Kilauea because the volcanic rock resembled some of the surface of the moon. And gosh sakes, it must have been as cold as that too, because it was about 30 degrees up there. On Kilauea sits at 5,800 feet, and it could snow. So we had snow in Hawaii. But I met some of the astronauts, and it was a wonderful experience. They felt sorry for the troops because they were on guard duty. They couldn't move around much like they were in suits and everything. And so they talked the CO into sending us to what was called KMC, which is the Kilauea military camp. It was established as a rehabilitation facility back in World War II. And gorgeous place, absolutely just beautiful beyond imagining. In that area of Hawaii, there's lots of half-dead trees that because of the rainfall, and they used to get a lot of rainfall, didn't get this much this year, and orchids would grow out of them. And we got to go to. I walked through Halemaumau crater, which a few weeks later erupted, and so I was glad I got to see that. The subfloor in Halemaumau crater is 500 degrees. So even on a wood deck, you had to walk pretty quick. And then I got to go to Volcano House and had a great few meals up there, and sure beat military food. That's for sure. But I went back to Hawaii, and then after that, we got a call up one day late in my tour to go to Taichung, Taiwan, of all places. And I asked the CEO, "What in the heck are we going to Taichung, Taiwan for?" And he says, "We've got the National Chinese have donated 300 or 400 of their airborne troopers to go to Vietnam, and they need education in what it's like." Well, we didn't do much of the educating. Most of that was done by Special Forces people. But we did get to observe an airborne drop. We were sitting in a grandstand with all the top brass, and they had the Special Forces senior commander came up, and he says, we're not dropping today. And the Chinese national general got quite upset, and he says, we're dropping. He says, you guys don't have the courage to drop. The 35-mile-an-hour crosswind blowing across the observation area, and that was beyond their limits. That was beyond what Special Forces even did, even in a bad day. And so sure enough, they lost 11 troopers buried in the ground somewhere, and they dug them up. And then they dropped 2 Jeeps in front of the reviewing stand, just within a couple feet, and they went straight down 7 feet because of the weight and with the chute furling from the high wind. And talk about an experience. I had a good time there in Taichung, not from that exercise, but I got to meet our interpreter who interpreted from Chinese to English, and he invited me to his home. I had a lot of meals over there with him on a dirt floor. They weren't rich. He was a sergeant, but they barely made enough to keep him going. And he was had a wonderful couple little kids, and but had several meals at his house and learned a little bit about China and the Chinese people and their attitude, and just great folks. A couple of the Chinese soldiers came up to me one day, and their rations were dried fish, and they'd wear a bag around their waist, and they had an awful menu, but they could survive for a long time in the wild. But anyway, I didn't eat the dried fish, but I did experience something else. I noticed I'd been GI bread in sea ration form is just dreadful. I mean, it's full of preservatives, and you can barely taste any flavor in it. It's like cardboard, regenerated. And so I was sitting up at a deuce and a half one day, and I had these stack of cans from all the GI bread I'd put aside. And one of the National Chinese soldiers came up, and he says, "You going to eat those?" And he said, "Heck no." He says, "Well, I'll trade you a pineapple for all that bread." And he brought me in a fresh cut pineapple. I later found out in China, which is the second largest producer of pineapples in the world, after Hawaii and some other places, they grow it on night soil, which means they clean the restrooms at night and then use the night soil for growing pineapples. I didn't know it at the time, but the pineapple had a real acid taste to it. And what was that? And so I asked somebody, I said, why is the pineapple here so much more acid than it is in Hawaii? And he says, "Oh, they grow up in night soil." That was my last fondness for pineapple. But anyway, we shipped out the Chinese to Vietnam, and then went back to Hawaii. In the meantime, doing all that training, I'd attained the rank of Sergeant E5 in about 20 months, which at the time was sort of a world-class record. I have a gift for gab, and I talk to everybody. So it blessed me at that point anyway. And I heard one day they were doing a TDY, which was a support mission to Vietnam, and I went and did about 12 weeks over there. And it wasn't real hot at the time. Most of my crew was doing airborne pickup and delivery operations with helicopters, and I saw what was coming, that's for sure. And had an interview with General William Westmoreland, who wanted my MOS. He wanted me to stay over there. And he was leaning on everybody out in the line of people who were supposed to go home because our enlistment had run out. And he promised us everybody but the kitchen sink to try to get us to stay. And I kind of saw the writing on the wall. These folks weren't getting the kind of support I wanted when I first went over there. And I got a real education in Vietnamese history when I was over there, and felt we were in the wrong place at the wrong time, and decided to end my enlistment. So I flew back to San Francisco to get out of the military. I served 3 full years on a voluntary enlistment, and I just, in some ways, I regret that leaving because I kind of left everybody else there. But I kissed the ground in San Francisco and boarded that plane. And I picked up several medals. I didn't totally deserve all of them, but sometimes you get a medal in the Army for just being there. And I had a good conduct medal. I had an air medal and had a couple other Southeast Asia medals as well. And I kind of put those away. And I just, when I was stationed in Schofield Barracks in Hawaii, I bunked near a gentleman named John Milius, which was an interesting area. He was from Hollywood. He had been drafted. He had a 2-year enlistment. And he was just an interesting person. He would write all the time. He was always writing and thinking and talking. And I communicated with him a little bit after I got out, but he went on to become a famous director. He directed The Wind and the Lion with Sean Connery and Candice Bergen, and probably about a dozen other films most people have never heard of. But just a great experience all in all, knowing him and learning a little bit about camera work and what they do in Hollywood. And was always amazed, like I was when Elvis enlisted that, or was drafted, that he actually went, because he didn't have to go. He had tons of money and didn't need to be in the military. But he had a real sense of duty and honor, and I always credited him with that, and always remembered him for that. And but anyway, I had my Sergeant stripes on and all my medals on my chest, and I got on the TWA flight to Chicago on the way home. And as fate would have it, the stewardess announced over the PA on the way back that this was the champagne breakfast flight from San Francisco to Chicago. Wow, this sounds neat. And sure enough, she had a brother who was in Nam. And she saw my medals and stuff, and she filled my champagne glass all the way to Chicago. And to say that was a memorable flight would put it mildly. I never drunk a lot. We got free beer with Nam, and we got passes to this NCO club and everything else. And I would drink occasionally, but I wouldn't drink heavily. And but I was plastered when I got to Chicago. And so I tumbled off the plane in Chicago and made my way across the terminal to the flight to Cleveland. I get on the plane to Cleveland, and the pilot comes on, the PA, and he says, "Hi, kiddies, welcome to the happy hour flight to Cleveland." My eyes kind of rolled back in my head, and sure enough, I had 6 or 7 of these little bottles on my tray before the flight ended. I don't fully remember how I got into the terminal, but I blessed the day my mother was always slow in arriving places, and I laid on a bench there, and a traveler's aid lady poured coffee into me for about 2 hours to get me sober enough to go home. And just when I was ready to sit up again, my mom arrived, and that was something. She just did that. And but the GI Bill came along shortly after that, and I blessed the day the GI Bill was reimposed because I needed it. I wanted to go back to school. I wanted to finish my degree, and I went to a recruiter attorney in Cincinnati, Ohio, and he did an interview with me, and he says, "So, well, we've seen some of your writing. It's pretty good." He says, "You got to be a lawyer." I said, "Oh no, I didn't want to be a lawyer. I heard bad things about all these other lawyers that were raking in the money and walking over people." I said, "I don't want to be a lawyer." But sure enough, I finished my political science degree at Wright State University, and with the GI Bill, and I took his advice. I applied to a law school, University of Dayton School of Law, and it was a new class. They had closed the law school there at the University of Dayton back in the end of the Depression because nobody was taking law at that time. They didn't have the money, for one thing. But with my GI Bill, I was able to apply. And when I applied, my grades were average, my LSATs were average, and I thought, oh, walk me out of there. I'll never get a chance, you know. And this is gone. And so I wrote an essay, like I often did. I write essays every time, and it gave me a chance to elicit what I felt after getting out of the service and felt about public service in general. And I promised in the essay that if they let me in, I was going to graduate and become a public service lawyer. And I later fulfilled that. They let me in the class. I'm sure I was way down the list of selectees because of my awful grades and my average LSATs. But my essay carried the day. I did lots of, thanks to having the float of the GI Bill, I was provided with lots of opportunities that the other folks wouldn't because I didn't have to work full time. Most of the rest of them were working a job and then going to law school. And that's a harrowing experience trying to do both. And but gosh sakes, we did everything in law school. I was a holy terror. I joined a bunch of local civic organizations to bring suits against major parties like the Dayton Power and Light Company, which was trying to build a nuclear power plant down in Zimmer Station in Cincinnati. And one of the city commissioners walked in one day in the law library, and she says, I need some budding lawyers here to help me because we want to fix the board. She says, a bunch of 70-year-old white-haired guys are on the board, and they're wasting our money, and they're about to get us into this nuclear project, which is going to flatten us and quadruple our rates. And I says, oh, that sounds like a real harrowing deal. But everything came together. The Lord's blessed me in a number of ways through the years, and that was one of them. Excuse me. I'm going to take a sip. I'm getting too wordy. If I run over, just cut me off. So, in any event, we found out the union for the power company was on strike at the time. So we needed a lot of boots on the ground if we were going to change the board on Dayton Power and Light. And so we went to their community hall, and we were helping them stuff envelopes to get the proxy going to get some people on the board. And got a call from the SEC when I was standing there in the union hall, and he says, where are you right now? And the SEC asked, and I said, well, because the company was following us with private detectives. And I said, well, I'm here in the community hall, the union community hall. And they said, well, your legal career is about to end. And I said, why? And meanwhile, the president of the union was standing at my shoulder. And this, again, the Lord has blessed me in so many ways. The union president, he says, this is a rented hall. We don't own it. It doesn't have a union logo outside at all. We use it all the time for different private functions as well. And so I recited what he just told me to the chief attorney at the SEC. And he says, oh, never mind. And he hung up. They thought they had nailed us and shut us down, really. This was all the dirty work that the power company did. And but we won, and we won in a weird way. The district court judge was an unusual person. He'd been an attorney and judge in Cincinnati and took the federal bench in Dayton. And he had a sort of colored career where he took a lot of bags from people to lean a certain way in certain directions. And so when we heard his name mentioned, we thought, "Oh, brother, our whole episode's gone. We're dead." And to our amazement, we got a call to come to the court on Saturday morning because the judge had ruled on some of our motions. And the fact that he was there on Saturday morning freaked me to start with. I thought he was going to slam dunk us and get us out of his way. But his law clerk was a brilliant guy who went on to become a federal judge himself later. And he had pushed him in the right direction. He told him that all of our motions were correct and that the power company was way out of line. And he says, so the judge walked into the conference room on Saturday morning and he says, "They win, you lose." He says, "I want the mailing to go out in a week." And we were sitting there's these law students have just trashed one of the, Cravath, Swaine and Moore was their attorney at the time, which is still the second or third largest law firm in the world. And talk about high pricing. They were getting $2,500 an hour for their working with DP&L. So they were shocked, to say the least. But they had no time because he had ordered this thing to be done in a week, and there was no way they were going to appeal it to the Court of Appeals, which was a fairly liberal court at the time. And so we were in shock. One of the reporters walked up to me after we came out of the conference, and he says, "How do you feel?" I says, "Pleasantly surprised." And those are the misspoken words of all time. I mean, I was shocked. I was just shocked to my drawers. But that's the way my career went. I always seemed to be in the right place at the right time. I got into the habit because none of the big corporations would hire me because I was written on somebody's blacklist at that point. And so I went into private practice and did a lot of criminal trial work. Did that for several years. And then I got a call from a former classmate at law school to come be an attorney at the Legal Aid Society. And this was right up my line because I loved doing that work. And so I went there. I became managing attorney in about 6 months and had 22 attorneys under me. It was a big office and did a lot of good work for those folks. And I also, on the side, as a side habit, I took court appointments from the juvenile court, being a guardian ad litem. At the time in Ohio, they paid guardian ad litems for the court, in addition to the CASA people that did it voluntarily, and had some just absolutely wonderful experiences with these folks. And late in my career, I took this one case as a guardian, and it looked like a open and shut case. I had a case of a shaken baby, and for those who don't know anything about shaken babies, that's the worst form of abuse you can ever visit on a child. A person would grab the child by the shoulders and leave large bruises on their shoulders, and would shake them violently, causing these cerebral hemorrhages to occur. And sometimes it was fatal. And this was what they alleged this couple had done. And I prayed on it a lot that night when I went home. I said, I'm not sure I want to be involved in this. And but it proved to be a blessing in disguise. I started investigating these people, this couple. They had 3 professional people. One was a doctor, one was a lawyer, one not a lawyer, but in any event, all 3 were connected to the medical profession, and they were at the top of their marks. And these are 3 kids they raised previously to this shaken baby. And I thought, this doesn't sound likely that, this kind of family, good family, supportive family would be involved in this. And so I initially wrote my guardian's report recommending that the agency find him guilty and ship him off somewhere. And then I got a call from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. The grandmother who had been babysitting with the baby the night of the incident, where the baby was shaken, was asleep on the couch. She woke up. The baby had on stocking feet on a polished wood floor, and it did what they call a contra coup fall. The feet went out from underneath the baby, came around and hit its head on the edge of the door frame, and that's what caused the shaken baby. And so I had Grandma, I says, I've got to have you back here tomorrow. I says, can you get on a plane or get a car ride and be here to testify, because I want to put you on the stand. I'd read up on shaken baby, and I knew that there were only a limited number of circumstances where a baby would be receive these lesions and so forth, and not be involved in either a car wreck or an abuse situation. And a lot of those were published out of Japan, of all places. In Japan, children are held up like little idols, and they're nurtured and cared for like you wouldn't believe. And so I trusted the study that I was reading, and I got Grandma back and put her on the stand, and the poor magistrate almost had heart failure when I changed my opinion and urged that the child remain with the parents. And but it was a blessed experience. I opened the Sunday paper that weekend, and what's on the front page but my case, all about the shaken baby. And they had 2 more pages inside, so I became infamous overnight. The presiding judge of the juvenile court called me, and he says, Tom, I says, I know you like trial work, but would you like to take the bench as well? I said, wow, that's heavy. I've been in practice, probably 15, 20 years at a time. And I said, yeah, it would. In your court, I says, I like the juvenile court. I like doing work with these kids and families. And so he appointed me to the bench, based a large part on that article in the Daily News. And but I was blessed by that experience. Just so many, I could go on for hours about all the junctures where the Lord has given me ammunition. He's given me the go-ahead on something I was doing. My last case I tried to felony jury trial, I got it from the assignment office, and I went to, I looked at it, and I said, this is terrible. I had a 65-year-old ex-veteran sergeant in the Marines who, when I went to interview him in the jail, was crying and shaking and everything else. He was charged with raping a 26-year-old cerebral palsy victim and lady. And I was just mortified. I read the discovery, and it was all one-sided. There was nothing in there about him or anything else. So I went home that night and just laid there on the couch, and I told the wife, I said, this is going to be the worst case I've ever had. And so I had to get it as my last one. So I started getting phone calls. I got a call from the presiding judge of the local bench, Common Police Court, who'd been in, he was head of at one time, Schmidt-Schnacke, which is the largest firm in Dayton, Ohio at the time. And so it was pretty important that he says, I'll come. He says, I don't need a subpoena, just tell me where and when. And my whole shift in that case went just like that. I was amazed. I just totally shocked. And got a call an hour later from his ex-wife, the guy's ex-wife. She says, if you need me there, I'll come and testify for him. His character is beyond reproach. And what the guy did, he drove a school bus. And after work hours were over, he would pick up these terminally ill children and take them to parks and recreation areas and just do wonderful things with them. And I got more calls. I got a half dozen calls. I got the nurse who had been nursing the CP lady telling me about all the military and other folks that would line up at the front door waiting for action. And I said, this isn't the lady I'm reading about in this document. This isn't the same person. And sure enough, I went to trial. And but like I said, the Lord has blessed me in so many ways. I just, it was a wonderful time for me. I loved selecting juries. I loved talking to them and hearing about their life and everything else. And but the last lady they picked for the role to be questioned and cross-examined was a black doctor's wife. And I said, well, that might help me in a way because being a doctor's wife, she's experienced a lot of medicine. And it was a unique experience. I just, but I learned a lot from her along the way. And I left her on the jury, and the prosecutor, to his infinite stupidity, left her on as well, because she was very exacting about everything. And their evidence was really shaky. The chief prosecutor in the case was a lady I knew in law school, and her detective was a loser that had been cited about a half a dozen times and had never actually gone out to the house to talk to the lady or do anything else. He just picked up the lab reports and so forth and ran with them. And so trial shows up, and of course they dress her like a little Bo Peep. She had a white dress with little blue ribbons all over her, sort of decrying everything I'd learned about the situation. And so I put all my witnesses on, and I was still fairly certain, as the trial judge was. Trial Judge Marr, he's a crusty old Irishman who would knock down a case in a minute. So I tried it to a jury, and he told me, he says, as they were finally impaneled, sent back to the room, he called me up. He says, Tom, this guy's gone. He says he's going to spend the rest of his life in prison. And I said, I'm not so sure. And so anyway, 2.5 hours later, they came back, not guilty on all 3 counts. And judge's jaw dropped almost to the floor, I think, in the courtroom. But the black lady had led them down the path and told them specifically why they had to decide that way. And but I love trial work. I just, a lot of people hated it, and most of the young lawyers that got out wouldn't get in a trial for all the money in China. It doesn't always pay real well because it ties up a bunch of your time. And also, you need a gift for gab, where you like to talk to folks and sort of establish a repartee. But a lot of that was based on my military career. It established a discipline. I always get up at 6 o'clock in the morning, like I always did in the military. And it gave me a framework, gave me a discipline to know how to work and when to work. And it's just a real blessing. I see young people today and they talk about a military career like some sort of plague on their life, but it's really not. It's a training ground for the rest of your life if you use it that way. And I was just so blessed to be in that position. I met my wife at legal aid and married her a few months later, and we've been married for almost 41 years now. And she was a college-educated paralegal, and she helped me through all these trials I did and everything else. She was an incredible organizer. She could organize things, and but it was a blessing being with her. She was born in Dable, Kentucky, and she had the good cooking skills of all that time, and regaled me with lots of food, as you can tell. But it was a blessing knowing her, and I got to know the families here in Kentucky a lot, and it was a blessed experience. My wife's mother lived to be 103, and but for a fall she sustained and broke a hip. she would have lived a lot longer. Just a real, she was down to earth, soul-filled person. She didn't go to church a lot, but she had a basic religion. And I just, when I was in the military and afterwards, I sort of found religion a little bit. And in 2016, I wrote a book about Christian devotionals, 365 of them, published it at Amazon, and with the help of a friend. And that was a blessed experience. Back when I was on the bench, I used to in the morning, I'd have my little byline in the morning, sort of an attaboy, encouraging these folks who were burned out, the magistrates and judges, to kick it in gear and get things going. But the Army did that to me. And I don't understand all the anti-military stuff I hear. When I came back from Nam, there was so much angst and anger toward the troops, and I found that difficult. It just, because it wasn't the place I was in. I felt with a little better leadership, they could have stayed out of the thing in the first place, but it was a blessing being involved in the process and meeting good people. My commanding officer was a captain who got 2 Silver Stars in Vietnam. And so I knew a lot about what was happening over there and so forth. But again, I tell folks today, if you get a chance to serve in the military, serve. You may not ever end up in combat. You may never end up, but you can get a lot of advanced training in the military for other things. They have all sorts of things in addition to the GI Bill and so forth, and getting you involved in school later. But I've been so blessed and so many times in my life, and when I sat back and started recounting these things yesterday, I thought, oh my gosh, this was a blessed time in my life. It was, and I want to talk about that. I want to talk about the training for commitment, and tell folks that being enlisted in the military is not a bad thing. It can be probably the most educational and informative and wonderful experience of your life if you use it that way. Like I said, I met a lot of interesting people in there in the military, and I got ranked real quickly because I was a basic born soldier. Back when I was, my back wasn't bowed and I wasn't 80 years old. I used to do a lot of PT and exercise and that kind of thing, and that helped as well. But if there's anything else you want me to cover, I think I've covered about the whole farm for you, and I don't want to belabor you beyond too long.
Do you remain in contact with any fellow veterans?
A few of the people, and surprisingly, most of those are draftees. A couple guys in Iowa who recently passed a few months ago were my best buddies over there, and they were drafted, so they didn't get a lot of the things we got. So I would on Friday evenings. We bought a bunch of us bought an old DeSoto station wagon, and that was our beach wagon. And these guys from Iowa would go with us, and we had and there were 2 of them there, and then there was another guy, in addition to John Milius on occasion, who would head out in the beach wagon. And something they learned about me early on was that I can inhale an enormous amount of alcohol and still drive, and which was dreadful. I later in life I just said, why did I do that? And but we go to the beaches, and some of the Hawaiian folks that were enlisted in our group were always taking us to these hukilaus. That's a fish fry. They put fish in hot rocks and leaves and so forth, and produce some dreadful food. But they brought along their own home brew, and which saved us a lot of money in the process. But not a night went by that I didn't have to drag the other guys into the beach wagon and get them back to billets. So they remember that fondly, but not the hangovers. Yeah, I communicated with them, and when I got out, the first thing I did, I saved a human life with a guy who was stationed at Fort Lewis, Washington, in an artillery group, and he was a forward observer, and he was about to be shipped out to Vietnam, and he says, "Tom, tell me all about Vietnam." I said, "Well, buddy," I says, and this is a guy that drove around in an old Volkswagen that had a whole, didn't recycle cans that much then, but he had a whole Volkswagen full of beer cans where he'd drink and just drive. And I says, as a forward observer, I said, I didn't actually ever study the statistics, but I said, in Vietnam, they didn't live long because they were always out in front, and they get the short round as well as the Vietnamese firing at them with their tube launchers. And I said, your life expectancy is very low over there. I said, because I knew several, and they're both gone. And I told them, I says, find another MOS or get out of that thing somehow. And a couple weeks later, he sent me a postcard. He was in Canada, and he bailed out. So I guess I saved a life. In any event, it's just. But I communicated with him some later, and he was repatriated. He came back to the States after the war became unpopular, and yeah, I still connect with them, and not as much as I used to. A lot of them have already passed, and when you're 80 years old, there's not. Some of these guys had a pretty rugged life and contracted a bunch of things and ended up dying fairly early. So I lost a lot of my connections. So I don't communicate with them a lot lately. But I miss that. I'm a writer, and I tend to go online and talk to people and so forth, and I like to connect to them. Because most of the guys I knew were just wonderful people. I don't know. The good Lord, like I said, has blessed me all through my life. And I just want to say thank you sometimes. And that's why I write a weekly column with the paper. And I try to give people uplift, cheer them up, encourage them on. And whether they go in the military or not, I don't push that. But I tell them about all the wonderful things that happened to me as a result, and I think it has encouraged some of them to enlist. It's such a blessing. Yeah, it urges me to reconnect with some of these guys. I've lost some of their email addresses when I moved back to Kentucky, and I miss that. And but I'm sure on Facebook I could track some of them down if I worked at it. And I'm going to over the next few months and days, and yeah, I'm a real pro U.S. guy. I'm not real conservative, but I'm a real pro guy in terms of supporting the country and what we stand for.
Is there anything you feel we haven't discussed or should be added to this interview?
I don't think so. I think I've probably spilled the beans on most of my life and experiences. Like I said, I've had an interesting life, and it's been unusual, to say the least. I've come back to the library now because I love reading, and I find that in my later years, besides my writing my weekly stuff, I like to read several books a week, and I've gotten back into that here. Laurel County Library is wonderful. You folks, I walked in here, I died and went to heaven. because you have such a depth of material here. I'm also a movie buff. I've got about 500 DVDs, and so I watch movies insidiously and have a lot of war movies, which I don't watch often. And but you've got a great expanse of DVDs here, and a great historical perspective, as well as all the current, the Patterson books and so forth, which are current. I love Patterson because he writes a hedge-on style that it always interests me. It's a wonderful thing.